doesn't seem to be any public up there, but if there's anyone online over there, welcome. And welcome our speakers as well. I'll start the meeting just with the normal customary health and safety. If there is an alarm, it's not a practice, it's real. So please leave by that door and follow the exit signs, the green exit signs, and go. You mustn't use the lift, and you must go down the stairs and actually out into the main courtyard and actually to the car park at the far side for that, and you will only come back until that's been authorised. Please keep kind of mobiles off or on silence for this evening. Please, no one's allowed to eat unless it's for medical reasons, things. If any member leaves the room whilst we're in debate on the application, you won't be able to vote. I will instigate proper breaks if needed, and please, if any of you wish to request a break, put your hand up in that regard. For speakers, just to inform you that when I ask to speak, you know the time that you're allowed. You will get the green light. It will then turn to amber when you're getting to 30 seconds near the end, and then it goes red, and then you've had your time. Within that, there's traffic lights up there and across there. Okay, just to introduce the officers that are presiding tonight. We have Sarah Wilkinson as the lead planning officer for the application, Mr. Ollie Bolter, strategic manager, Mr. Ben Gard, Jodie Gibson, sorry Jodie, on the legal team, and in front we have Marie Bartlett, who is in charge of the proceedings, right? With that. So if we go forward, the minutes of the last meeting, do I have a proposer? Councillor Oliver, seconder Councillor Price. Do I have agreement for the minutes? No. Do I have abstentions for the minutes? I have 2 abstentions. You weren't here. Okay. Three abstentions. Okay, I will now sign the minutes. There you are. Declarations of interest. Any declarations of interest? Councillor Price.
Thank you, Chairman. It's come to my, it's become knowledge to me only in the last 20 minutes that one of the directors or one of the co-owners of Hartwood Homes is actually Mr. Justin Lavelle, is someone that I was friends with at school, but it's not someone I have a association with. I don't have any prior knowledge of this application in relation to how I know Justin. So I just thought I would make you aware of that and just ask for some advice whether I should participate.
Brief adjournment.
Yep. Sorry?
Brief adjournment.
A brief adjournment whilst Mr. Gard will come down and give you some advice. There's only other members who knows the said gentleman. I've got Councillor Oliver, so perhaps you can talk to both. Councillor Price.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, the advice I've been given is that there is not an issue with me participating. And I often find out that I know the applicant during or after the event. And often I do know the applicants, I'm afraid, as probably many of us do. But I always like to declare that interest if I do. But I will participate. Thank you.
I think a lot of us who went to school on the island probably have the same issue. Right. Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, my son and the applicant's son play in the same cricket team, so that's how I know the applicant. But I know nothing else about the application other than what I've got in front of me.
Okay, if we go to item 3, public question time. Have we received any? We hadn't received any questions last week. There is nobody in the gallery. So I'll move on to item 4, report of the Strategic Manager of Planning and Infrastructure Delivery. The application in front of you today is P-00356-18, which is the demolition of bungalow proposed residential development comprising 28 dwellings, 3 blocks of flats comprising of 72 units, 1 block of assisted living comprising of 44 units, 1 staff unit and 1 guest unit, total of 146 units, associated parking, new vehicle access and landscaping. Okay, I will now hand over to Sarah to do the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. If councillors, you just bear with me 2 moments while I work this computer system, make sure we're sharing virtually, electronically.
Members will note we have 5 screens now, so you have a choice. Huh? People having different.
No, just to ask, we actually have a 6th virtual screen. I wonder if we could just check with somebody that's watching online that they can also see the presentation.
It's not on yet. Okay, we're just waiting for it to be on the screen. Is it on yet? No.
Apologies, councillors, it does just take a few moments.
Huh?
What a brilliant bit of kit. It's so much easier to see what's going on when which gets it to work. I mean, you almost don't need that one, but those really are excellent.
Totally agree. Us with poorer eyesight are benefiting. Thank you. Long gone were the days before COVID when we didn't have hybrid meetings like this. And the public just came into the gallery. Everybody looking into the screen at home, we now have lift off and you've now got pictures. Okay, Sarah, you're able to start.
Thank you, Chairman. My apologies. The Outpatient Site is the site of the former Somerton Reservoir off Newport Road in Cowes, as shown on the image on your screen at the moment. The area is the area approximately shown by the cursor, including the kind of what I'd call two ponds. There's a walkway in between. Members would have seen, councillors, you would have seen the site on Friday. The area is an area of approximately 1.86 hectares. It's located, as you can see from the image, on the southern side of Newport Road. For just locational purposes, for anyone who didn't see, here at the point of the cursor is Lanes End School, almost directly opposite the site. You've then got the Cowes Medical Centre at this point, and then the Cowes Park and Ride is here. This, at the point of the cursor, is Somerton Reservoir, Somerton Roundabout even, which is approximately 80 metres from the proposed site. Just run through some the plans showing that site area, which shows that red line more accurately. And then a few photographs. We were there on Friday, so councillors, you're aware of the site, but this is effectively moving round the site, looking at it as it is now. Then some images looking at it from the park and ride, both in relation to further back and then stood on the bank where a number of councillors we stood on Friday. And then some images looking just up the road from the medical centre, further up the road to the roundabout, and then directly outside the existing access into the site and what is the cottage, the bungalow toll gate cottage, which would be demolished as part of the proposed application. The proposed development seeks consent for 144 units. Those would be split into multiple blocks, as can be shown on the plan on your screens. There'd be 72 what are called duplex apartments, which would all be 2-bedroom. There would be 28 3-bedroom houses and 44 assisted living units. Those 44 would be split into 40 1-bedroom units and 4 2-bedroom units. As we move through the slides, we have that's more of a visual, so just waiting to appear is a slide that shows the layout of those units. Members will note I've tried to, hopefully you can see it, indicate which ones are the duplex ones. So at the point of the cursor, this L-shaped building is the assisted living block. The duplexes, apologies. No, PowerPoint's just closed down on my computer completely. Bear with me, members, councillors. My apologies all, I appear to have completely lost PowerPoint, so I am just trying to reopen it. Please bear with me. We are currently trying to open the presentation on a different laptop, so my apologies. Whichever one works first, we will restart the presentation. I unfortunately have some serious performance issues with my laptop, so we will get that resolved for next month.
The amount of hours I've probably in my personal life have lost for at seminars with PowerPoints is it's probably a few years. Technology is there to support us, but doesn't always.
Right. My apologies, councillors. We are back up and running.
Thank you. We'll start again.
So if I work through the slides briefly to where we were, hopefully, and we're now moving much quicker. So thank you for the alternative laptop. Members, councillors, you'll see from this plan, so the area of the L shape here would be the assisted living units. The point here, here, and here are the duplex apartments, with the houses being then in this position and this position. The central area in the middle, as we discussed on site, would effectively be an open amenity area that would be open for planting. The areas between, which we'll see from the visuals in a moment, it's easier to see this in 3 dimensions, would provide amenity and walkways between for the units. This image is showing one of the undercroft car parking, which would be provided within what is currently the basin of the reservoir, so it would be under the building. The yellow that councillors, you can see on that plan, depicts where the WLO lines would be as part of the layout to ensure that the route for cars wouldn't be blocked at any point. So councillors, you'll note there's a condition that deals with the internal configuration of that, which would be private land, but the requirement for a parking for those WLO lines to be in order to ensure the free flow of vehicles through that undercroft area. The space is shown to provide 146 car parking spaces, 15 mobility scooter spaces, and what is, just for clarity, 45 cycle sheds. The report says 40, so just for clarity, that is 45. And they would be accommodated with bin stores in that undercroft area that is provided within the basin of the what is currently the reservoir. We'll now move through some visual images of the of the proposed units. So these being the assisted living units as proposed, the duplex apartments. We discussed on site, councillors, how these would have the glazed atrium over the centre. So this element being depicted obviously in here, which would be effectively a glass roof to what would otherwise be an open area, providing amenity and balconies and connecting areas for those units. Similar design is shown within the proposed houses that would sit on site. And then just move through some visual representations of what the units would look like with the materials and the configuration of them in terms of the positioning. And then again, I've got a few cross sections in the presentation at this point, just to show councillors more clearly how that undercroft parking would be accommodated within the site and how the building effectively sits then above that at ground level. Again, moving through, showing that elevated position of the ground level in order to accommodate the parking underneath it, and the relationship between the blocks on site. And again, some more images there. The top two images showing, the top image at the point of the cursor showing a more internal view of the site, an artist's impression. Obviously, any artist's impression, I would always say, has a slight caveat with it, but it is an artist's impression of how those blocks would sit with each other and how those amenity areas and those kind of cantilevered elements would sit. The other image, apologies, it looks quite dark on some of these screens. Hopefully you can make that out, which shows the image from the park and ride looking across the site. So that would be the assisted living units and then the houses alongside them. And then the lower image showing that from Newport Road with the landscape buffer area to the front. I thought it'd be useful to incorporate this slide, which shows effectively the type and nature of materials that are proposed. So with the kind of timber lattice work and various other features and glass balconies, I thought it might be useful for members to see in more detail. And the application, as well as the proposed units, in order to mitigate for the concerns raised by Ireland Raised in relation to the traffic generation. Councillors, you will note that the report outlines within both the highway section and the recommendation section of the report that the application would also include 2 elements of highway works. One would be the widening of an arm of Somerton roundabout. That's shown on this plan in this area. So it is the blue hatching effectively that runs through here, which would see a widening of that lane of the roundabout. The other works proposed would be a widening of the footpath directly outside the existing bungalow on site, which councillors we would have seen on site on Friday, where there is a narrow element of footway which would be widened in order to provide a consistent width of footway along that side of Newport Road. And then as well as that, I think it's important to highlight to councillors the other elements of the report that detail the proposed affordable housing provision as part of the application. So at the moment, the proposal is for 10% affordable housing on site, and that figure was reached in negotiations between the developer and officers following a detailed viability assessment and issues in relation to the simple cost of the development based on the abnormalities of the construction due to the nature of the site as it is today. Those affordable housing units would be provided in accordance with the definition of affordable housing in the NPPF and would effectively be 20% discount market value. And that would be 10% of the site, which equates to 15 units as part of the development. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Sarah. We now go to the speakers. I will just highlight that Councillor Laura PC Wilcock, as an adjoining local councillor, hopes to arrive shortly. She's in a meeting upstairs to come and speak. So hopefully she'll arrive after we've had the other speakers. First speaker is Mr. Long. You have your 6 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Members, I'm just going to keep it quite high level. The officer's report is detailed enough for you to kind of make your the assumptions and conclusions. But in reality, we all know that, I'll call it PDL, previously developed land on the island, is at a premium. There's not many sites on the island that can be used. And we all know that that's a policy preference, and indeed, probably in this room, it's a political preference as well. So I hope within the spirit of the application intended that cross-party, that there's a willingness to use previously developed land for a good purpose. And what does that do? Eventually, it reduces the burden on greenfield land. But that's not the debate today. But the focus of my attention was actually in Cowes. There's only 4 previously developed sites on the council's brownfield register, and importantly, all of those have a similar theme about the costs arising for development. One such site, the biggest site in Cowes and PDL, is at Medina Yard, and that site was for over 500 units, and that site delivered 0 affordable homes, albeit acting as a contribution. So the costs arising even within the council's viability assessments generally for the island plan recognises that brownfield land is extremely expensive to redevelop, but we must recognise that within the preference to use previously developed land for the purpose intended. So it's about balancing these tricky issues. So what the site does is try to make an efficient use of land. It is previously developed land, it is challenging, but it tries to strike the balance between doing it very cleverly by placing all the cars, which, love or hate cars, we tried to hide them quite carefully below the subdeck, using the land levels quite cleverly. So what that does, it creates freedom of space. In a way, it's no different from what's been done in Portsmouth and Southampton, quite cleverly and artistically, architecturally well done. What that does is it frees up the site above ground floor level, and what I mean by above ground floor level, above the deck. So that essentially is the same level as where the existing bungalow sits, as you will have seen on site. And it provides a range of units. So we've got houses, we've got assisted living units, we've got duplex units. And so what that tries to do is balance the level of accommodation for all demographics and for all types of users. And indeed, from a high level, kind of this site's quite utopian, really, in planning strategy. Being on your brownfield register, there's a purpose for that. It sits adjacent to a school, it's adjacent to a medical centre, it's adjacent to one of Cowes' biggest employment parks, it's adjacent to retail outlets, superstores, park and ride, public transport. You can't really get better as a mixed-use environment. So again, balancing all those issues carefully whilst protecting existing trees in an environment that kind of works. So I'll leave it with members. The report is self-evident. We hope that a favourable decision is made. The challenges of PDL development and viability assessment has been quite endless with the council to get to a common conclusion. And I'll leave it with members. I hope you approve the development and therefore look forward to building on this opportunity on a brownfield site. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Long. I now go to the ward councillor, Councillor Nicholson.
Thank you, Chairman. Being pragmatic, I and Norfolk Parish Council have sought the progression of this application, acknowledging that there will be inevitable complexities and compromises to resolve. We recognise our duty to play a part in the provision of housing on the island, particularly for those 2,000 plus island residents who are disadvantaged in unsuitable or temporary accommodation, in some cases having no place that they can call home. The development on the former brownfield site of Somerton Reservoir has potential to address these much needed types of accommodation for a significant number of people. Indeed, it is on record that the developer came to Norfolk Parish Council and publicly stated that he was willing to provide whatever type of housing the Isle of Wight Council said it needed. The development fills the National Planning Policy Framework requirement for so-called affordable housing at 10%, and we should not let the red herring of the outdated Isle of Wight Council policy requirement of 35% mislead us, for this development more than compensates in its provision for assisted living. It is also on one of the most sustainable sites that I have seen. As the committee may recall, I and Northwood have vigorously opposed other applications in our area for very good reason, but this is not one of them. Note, the number of proposed dwellings does not necessarily mean a corresponding increase in population, as it is anticipated that much of this development will be taken up by people who already live here on the island, as stated. The daytime Newport Cows bus service runs every half an hour from stops adjacent to the site, 15 minutes within 20 minutes walk to the Horseshoe Junction and a 10-minute walk to the converging route of Place Road. As pointed out in the officer's report, the site is next door to a medical centre with a chemist. It's only a few minutes walk from Aldi and the co-op, 20 or 30 minutes walk from the town, a few minutes to the cycle track, 15 minutes walk to the floating bridge, 15 minutes to the Isle of Wight Community and Sports Club and recreation ground. On-site parking is well facilitated. I do wish more developments would use concealed parking contained within the building. Of course it could be better, but it is good in balance and scale. Other local councillors, residents and organisations have expressed legitimate concerns on the access, and I note Island Road's extensive input and recommendation to satisfy. We must look at the de facto situation here and not the theoretical one. I and my neighbouring ward councillor have been dealing with illegal, inconsiderate parking and obstruction along this very section of the road during school drop-off and pick-up times. This cannot be allowed to continue. And we must do two things as an authority. One, get some grit and deal with these problems robustly. Two, having a parking strategy that does not just impose limits on parking, but facilitates what is evidently really needed by vehicle users. Concern has been voiced too that an already capacitated sewer system may be overloaded, and the committee might like to seek assurance that there are provisions in hand to accommodate this extra volume. Other concerns raised that members will be all too familiar with are the potential additional loads placed on the already stretched and short-staffed medical centre. Planning tells us that this is not of a material concern, but we are the local authority, partner to the integrated care system. And if we repeatedly fail to demonstrate joined-up thinking in these matters, then we will continue to affect people's health and well-being, a very practical and public concern. As a promoter of our heritage, I'm saddened to see the loss of the former 1846 toll gate. Although the building is not listed, it remains evidence of an interesting feature of our past. I note the officer's report that no agreement has been reached with the owners of the building, and officers consider that it would not be possible to build the proposed development without demolition of the toll gate. If members accept this view, then perhaps some marking of the toll gate could be agreed by condition or voluntarily. Maybe an illustrated plaque denoting its purpose and history. In conclusion, members, As local ward councillor, I do support the recommendation for approval with conditions. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nicholson. Welcome, Councillor PC Wilcox. You have your 6 minutes to speak as the neighbouring ward member. Thank you.
6 minutes. I didn't realise I had to have that long. So thank you all very much. I did try to get online to look at more detail as Councillor Nicholson, but I tried 7 attempts and couldn't get through. I got somebody else to try and I still couldn't get through onto the website. So apologies if these items that I raise have already been addressed. It's very rare that I attend planning meetings because I don't feel the need all the time to have to be here. But on this one, it's a really important site to my Cowes residents. The application was advertised in Northwood because it's that's that side of the road is Northwood. The other side that affects my residents is Cowes. So that's why probably you didn't have as many objections to this as perhaps you would have thought. However, you will be relieved to know I'm not wholly against the application, but I have massive concerns. And having lived on the road for 58 years, I think I probably have more, I don't know, more information than probably anyone sat in this room, to be perfectly honest. So before this goes ahead, I would request, if possible, that conditions be placed on the approval. So firstly, as Councillor Nicholson has raised, is about the traffic on Newport Road. Councillor Nicholson and I have had numerous complaints over the absolutely dangerous, really dangerous situation of the fact that people are parking on double yellow. We've just had the double yellow. They've been in around 6 weeks and still residents are parking, blocking pavements. You've got children in buggies that are out into that main Newport Road that you all witnessed when you were there for the planning meeting. You saw the lorries, you saw the cars, and people are in the road because of their parking. Something needs to be done. Can I suggest that a no right turn on exit is added, if at all possible? This will help to keep everybody safe. They have a small journey of, I don't know, not even 30 seconds to go to the roundabout and to be able to come back down into Cowes, but it will keep everybody safe. I just think if that could be considered would be a really good solution. The fact that you've got the medical centre, and we saw how close when we were there at the site visit, the cars coming in and out of Cowes Medical Centre, and then adjacent you're going to have those cars coming in and out. It's going to block the vision. It's going to be horrendous. So a no right turn would alleviate. The drains. Unfortunately, on the site visit, you weren't able to follow the drains, but I've been there. I was there when the people were pumping out the reservoir at one time, just after they bought it, and so I followed the pump and followed the water. It actually goes to the back of the medical centre, and then it comes down through and it goes under the cemetery. Now, as it goes under the cemetery, it's completely flooded, and the reason why it floods is because it's completely blocked. The drains are completely blocked. I've lifted them up. I've lifted and tried to clear the drains myself. They're completely blocked. If you then follow that further, which I did, and I went into an ancient woodland, you will see that the whole of that drainage system it's brick, it's all brick, and it's all collapsed. The whole thing is collapsed. The water can't come out. The water then, if it could get through the blocked bit and everything else and the flooding in the cemetery, it then goes under that great big main Arctic road. And then it goes into the other ancient woodland, and then the water comes down through there. Again, that is not, it's just not clear. So what I would say is, again, a condition of this is something where you will look at, and you, before anything starts, that the drain works are cameraed and they are cleared and mended before. I am absolutely appalled that Southern Water don't think there's an issue. They obviously haven't followed the drains like I have. I have got the photos. I can send them to the committee. I don't come here to make this up. The height of the buildings, I couldn't see because obviously from the plans, I just would like people to be mindful of the height because of the light and the privacy issue looking into my residents' bedrooms on that main Newport Road. Because I couldn't look at any of this online, I don't know whether that is an issue, but I would like people to be mindful of that. Councillor Nicholson has mentioned about the toll gate, the 1846 toll gate. I'm absolutely appalled, and I have tried, I don't know how, numerous occasions to have it listed. That is absolutely precious to us as a piece. But I would, if it can't go ahead because of that, I would be accepting of putting some kind of memorial type thing there. There must be something there with a picture of the toll gate. There are 2 trees in that garden that are absolutely exceptional in size and species, and they should have TPOs on them. Please, could somebody look at those 2 trees? Finally, please, 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 if we are to have all of these homes in Cowes, not Northwood, because it's in my area, my residents face it, please, please, is there any way we can have a local connection added to it as a condition? That is, residents from Northwood, Cowes, Gurnard have priority. Thank you very much.
Thank you. In the end, you used the full 6 minutes, so thank you. With that, very well timed, Councillor. Okay, I'll just put back to Sarah if there's any issues that are raised by the speakers you want to comment on.
Thank you, Chairman. The only element that I'm going to specifically respond to, but obviously can come back on other points and suggested conditions if councillors wish me to. But the only element I wanted to come back on was just a point of confirmation and clarity in terms of a factual point, in that a comment was made in public speaking about the affordable housing provision at Medina Yard. And just for clarity, just to confirm, that there is no on-site at Medina Yard as part of phase 1. For phase 1, we have a £3 million contribution towards affordable housing. For phase 2 and 3, the section 106 is worded that it could be on-site or it could be another contribution. So the 3 million that we have is solely relating to phase 1. So it's not strictly accurate to say there is no on-site provision or no provision of affordable housing for Medina Yard. There is currently a contribution, and for later phases there is the potential for a combination of the 2. Thanks, Chairman.
I'm going to follow the formula we've used before, so that there'll be questions, then debate, and then I'll be seeking for proposals regarding the application. So open to questions. Councillor Churchman got her hand up just before you, Councillor Quirk, then Councillor Quirk, then Councillor Jarman. And then Councillor Price.
Yeah. First question is Undercroft parking. Is that a spelling mistake, or what is Undercroft parking is the first question. And secondly, can you confirm on there which are the houses? I'm assuming they're the ones on the right, but could you confirm that, please? Oh, they are.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I think that undercroft is a term that's used for parking effectively under a building. So undercroft parking effectively is underneath, so parking underneath the building. To confirm that one, in relation to the houses, so one set of the houses, I have a different plan to show it, but this is one element of housing at the point of the cursor, and then the other block is here. So those are the 2 housing blocks.
May I come back with one other thing? We've talked about 144 houses, and then we've talked about a guest unit and a somebody a resident to live in, where are they on there?
Thank you, Sir Chairman. Thank you. There are 144 units, not
Yes.
144 houses. So if I go back to what I said earlier, that you've got 144 units, you've got 72 duplex apartments, which are here, here, and here. Those are the apartments, the 2-bed apartments. You've got 28 houses, 3-bed houses, which are here and here. And then you've got 44 assisted living units, which are in this block. As part of that block of assisted living units, there is the staff unit and the visitors unit.
But the application says 146.
That's the total.
It said 28 dwellings, 72 units, assisted living, 44 units, 1 staff unit and 1 guest unit.
Apologies. Yes. So the staff unit and the guest unit make it above the 44 for the 46. So my apologies. They're not included in the 44.
They're not separate.
So no, they are within the assisted living building. My apologies.
Thank you.
Sorry about that. 2 questions. The first one is Swidham Road. It's about the suggestion of the no right-hand turn and whether that's A, necessary, and B, desirable or feasible. The second question relates to the 10% housing, affordable housing. There are some quite different types of property here. We get about 15 units for our 10%. I would want there to be a condition that means that we get maybe 5 houses, 5 flats and 5 assisted accommodation. So we don't get just 15 units of the cheapest possible one going, that we have a need for houses for families already in this area, and that's so we need to have a share of the affordable housing has to be houses as well as just the 1-bedroom flats. And we've got plenty of room to put a condition in because 18 and 19 are duplicates, so we can take 19 and that can be the condition that makes this sensible.
Councillor Jordan, could you sit down up there if possible? Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. In answer to the 2 questions, firstly, in relation to the right-hand turn lane, I am presuming we're referring to right turning out, not right turning in, because you couldn't take away the right turning in. Fabulous. It's not a request or requirement from Island Roads, but it is something that is possible for us to incorporate if councillors wish it to be added to the requirement. It is one of those things that it is slightly difficult because it would be a private entrance. So we couldn't specifically do a traffic regulation order to require it, I would suggest. It's a slightly difficult one because it's coming on and off private land, but we can require effectively the access to be designed so it flows in that direction with the relevant signage to require it to be right-hand turn, I believe is the correct thing, but I will in a moment go to my learned highway colleagues to confirm that matter, but I see no practical reason why it couldn't be incorporated as an additional condition. With regards to the affordable housing question, yes, should councillors wish to stipulate what that 10% split is and do 5, 5 and 5, that's absolutely reasonable. It wouldn't be able to be a condition, although I apologise, there is a duplication in the conditions, and it would have to be a part of the Section 106 agreement, but that can be added as a clause to the Section 106 agreement within the affordable housing provision. I believe that, and I'm pleased you've spotted the duplication, because I believe that is probably one where we have duplicated the removal of PD for windows, where it was the intention to remove another element of permitted development. So I would say to councillors, please be aware that if the decision is made to approve the application, we will rectify that error in the final decision notice, and the correct PD removal will be included. The intention of removing the permitted development rights for those elements of the scheme is to ensure that we don't have suddenly extensions, dormer windows, VLUX roof lights added to the housing within this development, because we feel it is quite a specific design, and should people start building extensions without control of planning, it could look rather cluttered and slightly odd, which is the intention of those. So we will clarify which permitted development we haven't removed by duplicating, and we will do that correctly. So my apologies for that error. And I would now go to Mr. Ransom, if there's anything I haven't covered.
Mr. Ransom.
Right, okay, thank you. In regards to the no right turn, basically that's not something that's been looked at. It probably can be done, but obviously the devil's in the detail, because the transport assessment obviously is working on a flow of, basically it's almost a 50-50 split. So you've got 40 in the AM peak, you've got 14 coming out turning left and 16 coming out turning right. Now, if you ban the right, you've now got 100% turning left. So the impact on Somerton roundabout will be greater, because obviously the 1.1% increase in sort of like peak times has been catered for in the transport assessment. But if you're now putting 100%, then obviously that impact will be greater. So again, you'd have to rerun the transport assessment and see what impact that would have on the roundabout.
We could do that.
You could do that, yeah. But as I said, the devil's in the detail, so we can't comment on something we haven't looked at. But yes, the Somerton roundabout is being mitigated for the impact that's on it. Obviously, if you're now changing the traffic flows on it, that will have to be reassessed. So.
Yes, Sarah, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I suppose just wanted to clarify to members that yes, councillors, that we can rerun the traffic model, but ultimately we know the answer to the question. We know that it's been modelled on the basis of 50% going one way, 50% going the other. So if councillors are satisfied that actually the impact on Somerton roundabout of 100% going that way is mitigated by the consideration of a need for a right-hand turn lane, then that is within your gift to make that decision. It's just you would need to be doing so in the knowledge that there would be greater impact on Somerton roundabout, because the impact that's been assessed would in essence be doubled.
Okay, thank you. It's Councillor Jarman. I've put you on the list again, Councillor Price. So Councillor Churchman. Councillor Jarman.
Yes, Press Chair, could I ask to go on the list again? I'll just do two questions at a time, I think, rather than hogging the floor. The first question I have is, what percentage of the roof space is going to be used for solar harvesting? And the second question is, what percentage of the car and cycle spaces will have electric charge points?
That's the first question.
Well, it's two questions. I think two at a time is enough.
Have you got that, Sarah?
No, unfortunately, I can't answer either of those questions specifically. I can't give you a percentage of the overall roof area that would be utilised for the what we'd call grey water harvesting. It would be part of the overall drainage strategy, which is conditioned as part of the proposed application.
Sorry, solar harvesting.
So solar harvesting.
Yeah.
Oh, apologies.
We're all aware of the prices we have to pay for gas these days, and the need to use our brilliant Isle of Wight sunshine as much as we can.
Apologies. At the moment, no, we don't have any specific reference to the percentage of roof area that would be solar panels. We also don't have the percentage of the car charging points that would be in the car park.
Can I just add to that, sir? If we wanted to put that as a condition that there were adequate, could we? I think it's important for electric cars that we're actually facilitating for them for the future.
If councillors wish to be specific in terms of having X number of charging points within the car park, yes, we can add that. I would give caution conditioning the percentage of roof area to be used for solar, because that is a far more technical situation in terms of what is relevant, what is in a southerly direction, what elements can incorporate roof, actually can incorporate them, and how that works. So I'd be concerned over doing it for the solar array, But yes, for the car parking spaces, we can stipulate a number of charging points if councillors should wish that.
So just to feedback my understanding of the answer, it would be possible for us to put a condition in that would say that the maximum viable roof space would be subject to solar harvesting, and, for example, to say that every car parking and cycle space would have a charge point placed with it. Thank you.
Yes.
In terms of the charging points, if we can condition a specific number of charging points, if that is every single space, then yes, we can do that if councillors wish that to be added. I would have concerns with regards to the solar condition should councillors wish to incorporate that, purely because I believe it would fail the tests of specific. It would be too vague, and I would be concerned that it's the kind of best buy. It would concern me that it wouldn't be specific enough in the wording that's been suggested, because we wouldn't be able to stipulate at this point what would be reasonable and what would be necessary and how that would work. So I would be more concerned over that. Obviously, it is the decision of councillors, but I would be concerned over that condition.
Okay, thank you. If we can now move to Councillor Price.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, much of what I wanted to ask has been asked, but there's a couple of issues. One is the mention again of Tollgate Cottage, which I appreciate that lots of these buildings have a real affection to local people and have a historical interest, and you know, clearly the building would sadly have to go to enable this development. I just wonder whether we could condition maybe a couple of interpretation boards that can be something that are put in place that you know, leave a lasting bit of history there and can be in the future updated and looked after perhaps by the local parish or town council. So I wonder if that's something we could condition without making it too onerous on the officers. But also I wanted to come back to the drainage. There is clearly a concern about drainage on the site, and because of its former use, and what will happen when the site is built out. Now I understand the drainage report, and I've said before, and I'll say again that you know, modern drainage systems, like them or hate them, you know, they are calculated and they work. The problem comes, of course, is the infrastructure around it and where the water goes when it leaves the site. Holding it on site is obviously hugely important. So my question is, what can we do to add some more? I did ask this on the site visit, as you know, Sarah. What can we do to ensure that the management company that's set up that all the residents would pay into, how do we make sure that there is some longevity in that? We've all got housing estates and blocks of units that have been built in our wards that the management companies have fallen apart after 20 years and no one maintains the things that were covered by the previous planning permissions. And then, of course, you then end up with residents having drainage issues or flooding problems that no one will take responsibility for. What can we make sure that is in place that gives some longevity to those arrangements? Thank you.
Sarah.
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor, you may note within the update paper that is in front of you, I have added a clause to the proposed heads of terms for the Section 106 agreement, so an additional bullet point to effectively paragraph 8.1 of the report, which effectively requires the 106 to have a section in it to cover the maintenance of both the communal open space and the surface water drainage system on the site. So it partly covers your point, I think, in that what it does do is at least have something within the legal agreement that requires a maintenance plan and strategy to be in place. What that would also do is cover how that would be paid for. I think many of the issues we have with some of the older estates and developments across the island is where there hasn't been that system in place. So there's been a maintenance strategy, but no one's paid for it to be done. And so if the company go bankrupt, for example, that is when it doesn't happen. By having a strategy within the legal agreement, it requires more information to be submitted about how that would then allow for how that maintenance plan would be implemented and maintained in perpetuity effectively, which would include how it would be paid for, and that links to then the monies that the residents were paying in towards that overall strategy.
Thank you. It's now Councillor Lucioni, then it's Councillor Churchman, and then Councillor Drew, and then Councillor Spink. I'll put you to the list. No, it's Councillor Lucioni.
I've got two questions and then me done. But just going back to what you were saying at the beginning, am I right in saying you're saying that the other houses are all going to be yellow, double yellow lines? So I was wondering about emergency access, etc. Is that right?
If you ask all your questions,
so it's an unadopted area, so who will enforce it, having listened to the issues on traffic on the main road, etc. So we don't want to make it worse. And my final one is, can we make it a condition of the 5-year link for the housing to the island?
Thank you, Chairman. If that's true. Yes, in terms of the double lines internal to the site, yes, we would, as a local highway authority, never adopt a internal road network like this, I would suggest, because it wouldn't comply with the terms of the contract. So yes, it would become a private managed system. So to an extent, it would become self-enforcing, because if somebody is blocking somebody else's parking space, it becomes an issue. And that's sometimes the beauty of this kind of layout. But there is a condition on the proposed conditions, if I can find it, which requires the strategy to be submitted and agreed, which will cover, and then requires those WL lines to be put in. So it would be about the management company ensuring so it would be a bit of resident responsibility there. But it is proposed to be covered through conditions to ensure that those W lines are put in and that there is an enforcement kind of covering that point. In terms of the link, the local connection link, yes, we can require that in the first instance, the units are made available to local residents. What we would normally do is it is a phase trigger. So you would say they need to be made available for local residents for a period of time. Then they would need to be made residents within the adjoining wards, and then you would work through a hierarchical system. We would always put a clause in the legal agreement that requires all units to be put on Home Finder for a week in terms of the affordable units, which is the council's run system in conjunction with the island housing associations, which effectively it's only a week because that's the only time you can put it on Home Finder, which effectively is all it's needed because somebody will come up straight away. The time scale in terms of the local connection criteria is often much more difficult, so we would simply propose that in the first instance it is local residents and then there's a hierarchical system. If councillors wish for that to be included, yes, we can put what I would call our standard clause in.
Thank you. I'll now go to Councillor Adams.
Thank you. I also have concerns about the drainage, and I'd like to raise a question at 22. I know the drainage engineer's done his report, but it states at 22, the development hereby permitted shall not be occupied until a scheme for the drainage and disposal of the surface and foul water from the development hereby permitted and existing highway service water drainage, which is currently accommodated on site, has been submitted to and approved in writing by the local planning authority. I'd like to add there, could we not make that the development hereby permitted shall not commence until a scheme has been approved? And also at the end of that paragraph there, I'd like the details shall confirm the wastewater treatment works that will treat drainage from the development hereby permitted and add to that and is of sufficient capacity to do so and will not exacerbate activation of the combined sewage overflows and should not add to the nitrate discharges into the Solent.
Have you got that, Sarah?
Thanks, Chairman. I can come back on 2 points there. The first point in terms of the occupation, you are absolutely correct. That should say commencement, and councillors will note at the end the reason is this is a pre-commencement condition to ensure. So that is a typographical error, and I can confirm that that should read prior to commencement. So absolutely agree that should not be occupation, that should be commencement. With regards to the latter point in terms of the sewage disposal, the wastewater treatment plant is Sandown, so it would not increase nitrates into the Solent. It would go to the English Channel. So there is no, we would not incorporate any wording that would state that it should not kind of exacerbate nitrates within the Solent, because it physically couldn't, because it's going to the English Channel. In terms of the sufficient capacity, that is not a matter that what we would effectively do is consult with Southern Water, and they would tell us whether they objected or not. That's as far as we can go. We don't have the ability, as it were, to stipulate the capacity of a Southern Water system. That is a matter for Southern Water and is controlled by other legislation, because what we couldn't do is identify if there was a discharge, what site it came from, where it originated. So because we can't stipulate that actually that waste has come from that area, because it all goes into the general drainage system, it would be entirely unreasonable for us to stipulate that additional caveat. Thank you, Chairman.
Could I ask a quick supplementary? It's also, I'm assuming, Sarah, with that amount of car parking spaces under the building and the nature of the reservoir, would there be any petrol interceptors included?
I'm happy to incorporate that within the condition to require petrol interceptors.
I now have on my list Councillor Drew, Spink, Jarman and the Churchman. So, with you, Councillor Drew.
Thank you, Chair. I was just wondering, in terms of the duplex units, are they leasehold or freehold, or is that yet to be stipulated? That is, yeah, thank you.
Lovely, thank you. Sorry, I was just taken aback by one question. My apologies. We would never stipulate the sale. That's kind of not covered by planning. So we would never stipulate how they could be sold, as it were. That's outside of our remit. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Spink.
I have a number of questions, but the first one I'm reminded was something that was raised by me at the site visit. And that was, I was told that I'd be given information as to whether or not the sewer, although it goes ultimately to Sandown, would storm discharge into the Solent. You may remember, Chair, telling me that I would have that information today.
Sarah, do you want to? We'll do one by one, Councillor Spink, on that one.
I believe the answer wasn't necessarily that you would have a specific answer to that you would have an answer to the question. And the question was, do we know whether the storm discharge would go into the Solent? So the answer to the question is effectively, I believe I've kind of answered it before in relation to, we cannot control or establish, based on the discharge from one site, where the drainage goes from there. So ultimately, what we know is that it would go into the Southern Water system, and from this site, that system goes to the Sandown wastewater treatment plant, which goes out to the English Channel. So in between the site and Sandown, what happens along the network between those 2 points is a matter entirely for Southern Water and the Environment Agency, and it is not something that we could get involved in. So it's not a question we can directly answer in terms of where that would go. But I would state it's very unlikely it would go into the Solent, because the pipe work is going Sandown. But that's not something that we have the gift to control. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Second question, Councillor Spink.
Second question is the ecology officer, Mrs. Grace Booth, I think it is, has said that she is concerned about the recreational impact on the SPA, the salient protection areas, and that she feels it necessary in her report for there to be further information regarding that impact. She says it's likely to have a significant impact to the SPA Natura 2000 site. Has that further assessment been done?
Thank you, Chairman. Effectively, what Ms Booth has outlined is that we have what councillors you may have heard us refer to before as the bird aware strategy. So there is currently an issue with recreational pressure on the SPA. Just over 5 kilometres of the island is covered within what we call the SPA buffer, and any development within that area contributes towards the bird aware strategy, which effectively works to educate people utilising the SPA to ensure that the recreational pressure to the same extent doesn't go. It's generally quite heavily linked to dog walking, because effectively the dogs disrupt the birds is very basic what it kind of deals with. The application does contribute the required figure towards the bird aware strategy. So the SPA mitigation buffer is being proposed. That's part of the assessment, that's part of the 106 agreement. What Ms Booth has suggested is that because of the scale of the developments, we're looking at 146 units, there is the potential for there to be greater harm because of the sheer number that would be generated by the development. That would require a potentially additional contribution towards green infrastructure, is what was agreed with. So following discussions with Ms Booth, the solution could have been a further contribution towards green infrastructure. The challenge with that is that, as councillors will be aware, there is a viability issue with this site, and there's simply, if we take an extra contribution towards green infrastructure, we wouldn't be able to have an affordable housing provision on site. So there is a balance between what we can take. For sake of argument, the cake is only so big, as based on the viability assessment that's provided. So officers have considered that really carefully, and in light of the fact that part of the application development involves assisted living units, which is likely to have a lesser impact on recreational pressure in terms of the likely ownership of dogs and the likely movability, for want of a better word, I don't know if that's even a word, apologies, of the residents within the assisted living units, that the harm is likely to be lesser extent, and therefore on balance officers considered that the overall impact was mitigated by the contribution.
And has, sorry, following on from that, has Mrs Booth been, has she been told about that, and is she content, given that she's the council ecology officer?
I'd say Ms Booth understands there is a balance within any planning decision as to how you deal with the elements of harm.
The other ecological question that I have, please, is this, is that when the preliminary ecological report was carried out, the reservoir, if I've understood it correctly, it was in a number of years ago, I think in 2018, the reservoir was empty, and it's now, obviously, when we went to the site visit, it's full, and there was obviously by one's eye you could see that there were geese and ducks on it. In addition, Councillor Adams here spotted with his eagle eye some carp, and in the letters of objection, apparently there are swans from time to time. Would it not be appropriate, indeed rather important, that there's an ecological assessment of the reservoir now that it's full? Because I recall, Mr Wilkinson, that you said that the reservoir, the proposal was for it simply to be drained and that the creatures would have to rehouse themselves. Well, fish, etc., may be in difficulty doing that. It may be, I know not, that there's protected species in there, and just draining it's not really very satisfactory.
Sarah, can you answer that?
Yes, I can come back on that one. There's, I suppose, 2 points to that. Firstly, planning cannot control the draining of the reservoir. So, as you said, they've done it before. they could, in essence, for want of a better term, pull the plug out tomorrow and drain it, and we couldn't stop them doing that. It's outside of our control. However, should members be concerned that there are fish in it, it was fully drained and the fish were removed. So if there are fish in it, the only water, to my understanding, that's going in that reservoir is the highway drainage. So if there's are fish in it, it may be that someone has put one in it. But if that is a concern of councillors, we can require, I wouldn't necessarily suggest it needs to be a full ecological strategy, because I don't think there are any protected species within it that could not be relocated. Carp is not a protected species. Ducks and geese, we can deal with that, but a strategy for dealing with that could be an additional condition should members require it.
Yeah. And I just have one final question, Chair.
One final question. Thank you, Councillor.
And that is this, on the local connection point, can you just explain, when you say the standard condition, what will be the local connection that's required? I mean, we hear a lot of the expression is bandied around that the island has a serious housing crisis. Is it possible to say that all of this housing in this site should go to island residents or people with a connection to the island?
So are you able to answer that?
I may need to draw in my legal colleagues, but I will try and find the kind of wording that we utilise in most legal agreements, which effectively runs through a hierarchy that says it must be the first, the ward, and then the adjoining ward, and then the island, and then further afield. I would suggest it would be, we have no policy relating to all units must be by island residents. I would be extremely concerned by such a restriction. I may need to bring Mr. Bolter and Mr. Gardin in relation to that point. But I would say that what I will try and do, if you'll give me a couple of moments, is find what I'm referring to as the standard local connection clause, if you can bear with me a moment.
Thank you.
Mr. Gard, do you want to add into that?
I just need to find it as well.
We just need a couple of minutes to find the relevant clause. I think it's unfair to ask a question while someone's actually answering that. What I suggest is a couple of minutes comfort break whilst our officers are finding the right word to actually answer you. So can we have a couple of minutes comfort break? Yes, please can you, if you're going out for a comfort break, please do not talk about the application. Thank you. Can I have order? Can we have order? Thank you. Just to comment before the answers given, please at future meetings, if you have specific questions that need some research and detail to go in, if you can put them in prior to the meeting, it actually will give the officers time to prepare on that. So if you can think of that in the future, that would be really grateful. Is it Sarah or Ben are you going to answer this? Ben, are you going to answer this?
Yes.
Okay, so Ben, answer to your question.
Thank you, Councillor Spink. I've got an answer for you on local connection, and we've quickly pulled one together here based on an application at Northwood. So we say local connection means in the following order of priority: a person who currently lives in Northwood who wishes to transfer to a smaller property to release larger accommodation, or a person who currently lives in Northwood and has an appropriate housing need because their family size has increased, or a person who currently lives in Northwood and wishes to transfer to a similar sized property, or a person from Northwood who is subject to a planned management transfer based on medical welfare grounds, or a person who has for 2 years prior to such acquisition or occupation been in continuous full or part-time paid employment, excluding seasonal employment, in Northwood, or has accepted an unconditional offer of paid employment in Northwood, or a person who currently lives in an adjoining parish who wishes to transfer to a smaller property to release larger accommodation, or a person who currently lives in an adjoining parish who has an appropriate housing need because their family size has increased, or a person who currently lives in an adjoining parish who wishes to transfer to a similar sized property, or a person from an adjoining parish who is subject to planned management transfer based on medical welfare grounds, or a person who has for 2 years prior to such acquisition or occupation been in continuous full or part-time paid employment, excluding seasonal employment, in an adjoining parish, or has accepted an unconditional offer of paid employment in an adjoining parish, or, and this is the last one, a person who is registered on Island Home Finder. So it gives priority to those in the ward in which the application is lodged, and then adjoining parishes, and then to those who are on Island Home Finder.
Does it therefore not go beyond that? So they can't then go, where in the hierarchy, if you extinguish all of those options, what happens then? Does it go to people on the mainland, or does it stay on the island?
I believe that there's no, and I'm looking at my colleague who's talking to me, I don't believe that there's no restriction on registering for Island Home Finder in terms of where the person comes from initially. Is that right?
I think that's correct. I believe that's correct, but also ultimately it goes through the criteria, but it doesn't at any point say once you've exhausted that criteria, thou shalt not allow it simply on the open market. It's not what's currently being proposed by the current local connection.
So it is important, and if you'll indulge me a little, Chair, would it be possible to have a condition that a data protection, as it were, compliant survey will be done to show the postcodes that the people occupying these properties have come from? Because one thing that concerns me is that properties on the island, we don't know really where they're going to or to whom they're going. And it seems to me important that we do. It's bandied out around that we have an island housing crisis. So these houses should be going to islanders. Now, if they're not going to islanders, we should know about it. And is it possible, therefore, to have a condition that a data protection compliant survey will be carried out of those people who take up occupation in all of these homes as to what postcodes they have come from?
Thank you, Chairman. Ish, I think is probably the answer. What I would say is that if we make this a requirement of the legal agreement, in order to demonstrate that they have complied with it, they would have to show that they've gone through that hierarchy. So they would have to demonstrate that what percentage of people live in Northwood, what percentage of people live in the adjoining parishes, and so they would have to provide some evidence of that, where the individuals come from. The element that it becomes slightly difficult on is that what we generally incorporate within the local connection criteria, because we think it's reasonable, is that if someone who works within that parish or the adjoining parish but doesn't currently live there has the ability to buy a home in that parish, or if someone has a family member that lives in that parish. So if someone's moved outside and they want to come back in, for example, a child leaving home and wants to come back. So in those instances, the postcode they're coming from may be a mainland postcode. It may be someone commuting every day to work in Cowes who wish to move to the island in order to continue with that employment. That becomes more challenging because obviously their postcode won't comply with the specifics of somebody who lives in the area, but they would still be eligible as part of that local connection criteria.
Okay, thank you. Can I now have Councillor Churchman and then Councillor Jarman?
Yes, I didn't see a picture of the houses, Sarah. Do you? We saw the apartment blocks, but not. Don't remember seeing what the houses would look like. Are those the houses?
Those are the houses.
They're the what? Right. Next question is relating to what Councillor Spinker said. Like a lot of us, second homes, how is there any control at all that we can apply about them not becoming and being bought as second homes? Thank you.
Councillor Bolter, sorry, Mr. Bolter, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. So to respond to that question, Councillor Churchman, we don't currently have any policy mechanism that allows us to give that control over second homes.
Okay. Councillor Jarman.
I was just waiting to see if Councillor Churchman wanted to come back with anything. You're okay? Good. Next two items on my list were regarding the comments by Cycle White about the need for a cycle track adjacent to the road. I like their comments very strongly, and that this is a particular dangerous road for cycling. For those of you who have not cycled on it, you might not want to try until you're quite proficient, particularly with the lorries. But I do think that their idea about having a dedicated cycle track, or where the current pavement is, some sort of mixed use road that allows the cyclists to use that area, not on the same piece of tarmac as those heavy lorries, is a very good idea. And I'd like to know if we could have that as a condition. And that's my first one. The second one is, and this is probably the biggest one I've got, is I looked at the calculations that were in the document regarding the ratio of affordability issues, and coupling this with the balancing of that affordability that was outlined, I think, earlier by Councillor Quirk here. I can understand why the 35% affordability ratio is difficult to meet. But looking at what I've found online from the build cost on brownfield land, it doesn't seem to be as completely catastrophic as the alternate figures that were put forward in the paper would indicate. So I believe that there should be a possibility to find some middle ground in terms of the affordability ratio. And so I wouldn't be looking to pull it back to 35, but I would like to know, and it may be that the officers will need a moment to talk to the applicant on this, I understand that, that we can pull it forward to a 20% figure with balancing across the build type. Thank you.
Sarah, have you got those two questions? One about cycleway and the other about increasing from 10% to 20%?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. In regards to the cycleway, that hasn't been assessed as part of the transport assessment. I am not aware if the road is even wide enough to accommodate such a feature. I'm looking to our highways representative to see whether they would have any idea. It's not something I would be satisfied incorporating as part of the condition tonight. If that was considered to be essential, it is something that would have to be done through a highway agreement and through a 27838 effectively into the site, or 278, and that would need to be assessed in terms of the width of the road, the ability to do it. We'd then have to look at the viability of such a works. Obviously, the viability assessment that's currently been undertaken has been done so on the basis of the cost associated with the current improvement works proposed to the roundabout and the footway. Anything in additional to that in regards to a cycleway by virtue of effectively widening the existing pavement, which is what I believe we're talking about, would be relatively substantial and would further eat into that scheme viability. So it goes back to what I said earlier about that cake. And then if we were to incorporate that, I would suggest the affordable housing provision would have to come down further or be removed altogether, if it would be viable at all. But I'm unaware of what that type of work would cost, but I would suggest it would be relatively substantial. And we'd have to ensure, because we'd have to ensure where it went from and to. What you don't want to do is have an isolated section of bike track effectively. It would have to lead somewhere, and that couldn't go across third-party land because that would be unreasonable. So I would suggest the extent of cycle track that may be required along Newport Road would be over and above what would be reasonable associated with this development, considering that, and that would be kind of my answer to that question. That would worry me, should we say, but I will let Ms. Bolter pick up on that point.
Thank you. Councillors, you may remember this was a similar sort of question and thought process to a recent application that the committee considered at Wootton. And we talked about the possibility of cycle lanes on the highway there. And councillors may remember that we spoke about some of the challenges in trying to achieve that through planning, effectively in isolation, without that wider policy backing or direction through a piece of work such as the local transport plan. So I think that there remains, as well as the advice that Sarah's given, I think we understand the ask, but at the moment, within where we don't have that wider framework to be seeking these types of interventions, we are going to struggle on a case-by-case basis. Thank you, Chair.
In answer to the second question.
The second question on affordability.
Regards to affordability, the officers have spent a substantial period of time. I would say the application has been in 4 years. The application, I'd say we've spent probably 3 of those negotiating on the viability of the scheme. And the provision that's put forward. The 10% that is in front of members is the results of those negotiations in conjunction with ensuring that we are also getting the required SPA mitigation contributions and the highway works. If councillors consider that actually they believe that there is a better, there's a higher percentage that they wish to request, obviously that is within your gift to request, but officers would caution in that may result in the scheme not coming forward at all for viability grounds. But it is ultimately a decision of councillors.
Sarah, sort of additional to that, I assume, I mean, you have an assisted living scheme as well as the affordability. So, and that assisted scheme actually helps, does target particularly the vulnerable. So it had I think members should say there is a mixed scheme within that this scheme.
Is it possible just to explain the assisted scheme a little so that the committee can understand? It may be my ignorance, I don't know, but I'm not entirely au fait with assisted living and who
I'm just very conscious.
In essence, it would be a matter where we would stipulate within the legal agreement who would be a qualifying person or an eligible person, should we say, for the assisted living. But primarily it would deal with an age restriction. What we wouldn't do is stipulate the level of care each individual would have to have as part of that process. So there could be somebody who is simply just age restricted but wants the reassurance of having kind of the other facilities there. And the ability ultimately works in terms of a warden kind of facility and having somebody available, and to somebody who requires potentially something more, but it's not care facility. It's not what we would call a C4 use. It is still a residential use. It's a C3, but it would be age restricted, and there would be the assistance on site as part of that kind of community.
Thank you. I think everybody's had some lengthy time for questions. So I'm going to move it on now to debate, right? I presume, Councillor Price, you want to debate, and I will at the same time be asking if there is any proposals within that. Councillor Price.
Thank you, Chairman. I just want to make some personal comments on what I think about this application. Which is that it ticks a lot of boxes. It's a brownfield site. It's a site that's been redundant for a long time. It comes with a lot of complexities, which we are learning while we're here. And from the site visit, we've listened to the local member and the adjoining member. I think we've addressed, or we're working towards addressing some of those issues in this. Undercroft parking. I'd like to see a lot more of it. I think it's a fantastic solution. Excluding the car is never an option, regardless of my bias on that. We've seen properties in Newport that have been built with no parking, and all that's done is put wider problems on the wider parking network. So we should always avoid not providing parking, and I'm glad to see that we're not avoiding providing parking. I take Councillor Jarman's point about electric charging points, but I've got to say, I think if we were to condition electric charging points on every parking space, not only would that be ridiculous, we'd be probably putting in out-of-date infrastructure by the time it's delivered, because plug-in electric cars are not the future, I'm afraid, and we'll learn that over the next decade that an alternative will be here, and it will be hydrogen fuel cells. Plug-in electric cars, I just do not think we should be going all out on putting in place, because that technology just will not be relevant in years to come. And we need to put enough of it, of course, for the interim period. So I'd absolutely take on board what Councillor Jarman said in that respect. And electric bikes, definitely. Electric bikes, there's a longevity in, without a doubt. The assisted living, something I want to make a comment about. Assisted living, my mum is a prime example of assisted living. She actually lives in a set of apartments that actually are not really warden assisted, but they're targeted for over 55s. That enabled her to leave a 2-bedroom property on Fairley Road, which freed that up for a first-time buyer. So assisted living frees up the existing housing stock on the island, and we need more of it. We need more of it. We need assisted living in Newport. That is going to help solve some of the housing crisis on the island, without a doubt. I won't say too much more, but I think overall, this does tick a lot of boxes. I would like to see some conditions come from other members in regards to some of the things we've spoken about, but I don't think that we should go too heavy. This has been a long time coming. We've listened to what the officers have told us. If we go over the top, we will end up with a solution that is not viable, and it will not get built. Let's come up with something that's right and fits it. I'm happy to work with another member on that if the time comes, but obviously want to hear what other members have to say first. Thank you.
Sure, the chair would agree with your view there, but still. Thank you. For me, the SPAs, Special Protected Areas of the Solent, are sacrosanct. They're consistent with our climate policy of the Isle of Wight Council. They're consistent with our status as a biosphere. And it seems generally accepted that this proposal will cause some harm to the solar protection areas. And for me, that's one step too far. I think that they are, as I say, sacrosanct, and we ought not to be looking at a development which will cause harm to those protected areas, because it's too important for climate change, biodiversity, and our continuation of the biosphere. And it's contrary to our own policies, council policies on climate change. So for that reason, I will vote against this. If members decide to pass it, I do ask that there be some form of condition so that, firstly, the local condition, local occupation condition that's been outlined is possible. And also, I do ask that there be some type of survey by postcode or by other means, which can be established surely as a Section 106 agreement, the detail, so that we can start finding out on the island who's living in houses that we're building, and we don't actually know. And that is a shocking position to be in my view. We only have so much land, and we need to know whether or not, if we're losing land, whether or not that land is going to people who need it and people who have an island connection. And without knowing that, we're simply all, for want of a better expression, dancing around the edges of our housing problem, and we need to know. So I'm against this because of the SPAs, but I dare say there'll be a majority in favour. But I do think we need a strong local connection clause, condition, and a survey to inform us as to where the housing is going. And it would be my contention on each application from now on, we have a similar survey to find out.
Councillor Jarman.
So I think we've had quite a number of comments made this evening. I think the general feeling seems to be very clear, apart perhaps from the last comment from Councillor Spink about his position, that there's broad support for this, but with quite a lot of additional feed into those conditions. So what I'm going to try and do is to propose that we accept the proposal this evening, but with the following clarifications. The first one is that there is no right turn out of the site. And I've made notes of these as we're going on. The second one, notwithstanding the comment that we got from the officer, is that there is maximum possible roof space solar harvesting. And I'm sure people can find the right legal terminology to support that. The third one, taking note of what's been said about EV charging points, but also the concerns raised by Matt here, is that we have 50% of the parking, but all of the cycle spaces with EV charging points. I think it is particularly important for the cycling side. That we include, as a fourth one, the provision of memorial signage in recognition of the historical characteristic of the toll house. The fifth one is that we require an ecological management strategy. That was the lower of the terms that was suggested by the officers to deal with the wildlife on the site. However, that is discovered to be at the time of their work. The sixth one is that we accept the housing priority list proposed by Ben Gard, and that we find whatever words are necessary to deal with the review of the situation afterwards. I do recall, by the way, on Westridge, that the developer was able to provide that information, and to note that 80% of the first phase had actually been provided by residents. So there must be a possibility of doing it by whatever mechanism that is achieved. And the final one really is confirmation of the element that was put forward by on item 22, I think it was, by Councillor Adams, which was the correction of the term regarding commencement, and also in that negotiation to include confirmation from Southern Water that the discharge of water and sewage from the site will not exacerbate the use of combined sewage outflows. So I'm not expecting them to give us detail of where the water came from, but they should ensure that it will not exacerbate the use of those overflows, which we know is already a big problem. So those are the summaries, and I think with those additional conditions noted, I propose that with those we accept the proposal this evening.
Can we just hold there before it goes to proposers so that the officers can catch up on that list of conditions?
Yes, I was summarising a lot of earlier ones. They weren't all mine. So,
Surprise.
Thank you, Chairman. If I can just quickly say, I think it would be worth looking at whether, I'll go back to the electric charging points. Electric charging points are a seriously expensive thing to put in. I think we ought to be sure that that is not, I appreciate that's half of what Councillor John really wants, but is it too much to ask? It's a huge cost. And I think we maybe should be looking at, maybe communal electric charging points or something like that. I don't know, or one in every 4 or something. Perhaps that's something maybe should be considered.
I'd be happy to modify it so that it's 25% of the car parking spaces to accommodate Councillor Price's view here. I should also add that one thing I was reminded of, and forgive me omitting it, regarding the clarification of the affordability. I understand what officers are saying, that my desire for 20% might be overly ambitious, but I think we should carry forward the 10% being balanced by type within the development. I don't know what the correct words for balanced by type are, but I'm sure there's some phrase.
Meaning, Councillor Jarman, and I think it came from Councillor Quirk,
yeah, is
that the actual affordability is spread across the types of housing. So if it's 15 houses, then it's five of the houses,
yeah,
5 of the flats, etc. Yeah?
Yes, correct.
Okay. Have we got those? I mean, I wrote them down as well.
Yes, I think the only element that I would seek clarity on, if possible, is in relation to condition 22, that is based on the motion, Councillor Jarman. Are you able to confirm whether you're satisfied that the Southern Water caveat element is established by officers confirming that at the point in which that condition is to be discharged, we will consult Southern Water, and if they do not object to the information, then we would be in a position to discharge that condition. Thank you.
Are you okay with the rest of the list of that? Have you got those, that mix of that 10% as well?
So if I run through it and check that we've got everything stated, we've got no right turn lane, the wording of being something around the lines of maximum possible roof space for solar harvesting. I've advised on that one before, but that's what I've got down. 25% of the spaces the parking spaces for cars shall have charging points. All of the cycle parking provisions shall have charging points. Interpretation board or plaque of the like for Tollgate Cottage. An ecological strategy prior to any works being undertaken to drain the reservoir with regards to the existing ecology in there and on there, should we say. Variation of condition 2 to correct the typographical error to prior to commencement, and an addition requiring all interceptors with a note. It wouldn't go in the condition itself, but that officers will consult with Southern Water prior to any discharge of that condition. They would be the additional conditions. And then the additions to the Section 106 agreement, heads of terms, would include the local connection criteria as set out by Ben Gard, a ability to review the allocation of the units to ensure that they are complying with that local connection criteria, and a requirement that of the 15 units, we take 5 from each house, for each unit type.
Thank you. That was extremely good. Are you happy with that, Councillor Chairman?
Almost. I would like, under the plaque or whatever it is for the toll house, that the placing of that and the nature and design of it is actually agreed with the local parish council. Is that all right? Thank you.
I cannot incorporate that within the wording of the condition, but if we note it in the minutes, we will ensure that through the discharge of that condition, we have that consultation process.
Thank you.
Happy to second that proposition.
I think we've now got a proposal from Councillor Jarman with the for a seconder for that proposal.
Happy to second that proposition, Chairman.
So I now have a proposer and seconder for a proposal. Does anybody want to speak in regard to that? Councillor Churchman.
Yes, a statement. As you leave the roundabout going towards Cowes, on the left-hand side you've got green fields, on the right-hand side you've got the small car park. Then you come to, on the right-hand side going down the hill, you have the new development. On the left-hand side, you have a row of red brick gabled properties which run all the way down to the first turning on the left, which are extremely attractive. I'm sorry if I'm going to upset the developers. I think that scheme is horrible. It is the only way I can describe it. I thought when the picture came up of the houses, I was looking at Somerton Industrial Estate, because that was how it struck me. It looked like warehousing. It's dark. It's tall. I didn't find anything attractive about it whatsoever. Cowes, 18th, 19th, 20th century buildings. And in the middle of it, we're going to impose a block which is going to be visible to everybody. And I'm sorry, I honestly don't believe it is going to do the local surroundings any good at all. I have no objection to the development. It's a brownfield site. For goodness sake, let's build. But can't we build something better than that, Chairman? And I just think it's awful. And I think it will be a blight on the scenery. And in 50 years' time, people will turn, that's if we live that long, people will turn around and say, however was that allowed to be built? Thank you, Chair. Oh, one other thing. Could I also, a very small point, if you're going to make the traffic exiting the estate turn left, could I suggest you impose that also on the medical centre? Because it's going to be a lot of traffic on that road at some stage.
Only look at the planning application that we have, Councillor
Yeah, I know. It's just really a point for highways.
Into that. And we also, in the relation to our personal views on the architecture of it, we have to look at the application before us, right?
Just, there was one other thing I wanted to clear up. There will be a management fee, I assume, because this is a gated development. Will that management fee be applied to the affordable housing? Because think about it, affordable housing, how and will people be able to afford a management fee? Thank you.
Can we, sorry, Councillor Christensen, did you want to make a comment before I go to the vote? Right?
I haven't got any opinions over the look of it. I'm not up to speed with modern materials used, and I think modern looking things is sometimes what people want. So I think though, if we're always going to create harm from these buildings, but I think this goes some way to what we need to be doing. So I agree that we should put forward those conditions and use this brownfield site in the best way we can to sort of go some way to go towards our housing need that we've got. So I just wanted to put that forward, that it's, you know, I agree with that. Thank you.
Thank you. I am now going to go to the vote, right? Those for the proposal by Councillor Jarman and the conditions. Thank you, Lee, for that, and thank you, members, for a very probing discussion. It's we have gone into detail, and I think we've got some good conditions there. Can we go on to the next? On my agenda here, bits of paper. Item 5, Appeals Performance Report. You have the report. I'm sure you've all read it. If I put to Mr. Bolter, I'm electing you tonight, and Mr. Bolter to present the report.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, councillors. As Chairman says, I'm sure you've all had the opportunity to read the report, so I won't dwell on it too much. I would simply draw your attention to both the executive summary and also the evaluation. So the very start and the very end, which I think shows that the quality of the council's decision making is of a good standard for non-major development and is above the national average and comfortably clear of the thresholds for assessing underperformance under the Town and Country Planning Act. And when we actually benchmark the council's performance on these measures, it is either slightly better or the same as the national averages. And because of that, we remain well clear of the national threshold of 10% for underperforming. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Any members have any comments, or we just accept the report? Can I have a proposal to accept the report? Seconded, proposed by Councillor John, seconded by Councillor Oliver. Can we have a show of hands of accepting the report? Thank you. I think that was unanimous. If we go on now on to item 6, cross-party working group to receive a verbal update from the Cabinet Member of Planning and Community Engagement on the cross-working party group.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Jarman's been doing a lot of work, and the statement that I have from the working party that Councillor Jarman is heading up is that the working group, with the aid of officers, have reviewed their draft terms of reference, which reflects the motion at the previous planning committee meeting. The final draft was circulated and no further comments received. This will now be concluded and circulated to the planning committee members and reserves for information. The group has met again and defined a list of topics, actions and requests for further information. Included was a request to confirm the present policy and procedural material relied on by officers. The strategic manager for planning has replied confirming the relevant internal documents and external regulatory material. Details of the SHLA meetings and associated documents were obtained covering the past 4 years. Some were available internally and others via freedom of information requests. These have been circulated to the working group for review. Details of legal issues raised by the Isle of Wight Council, third parties, have been circulated to the working group for review. Details of the Constitution and Code of Conduct references to planning have been circulated to the working group. The external references submitted by the strategic manager will be distributed to the working group. Councillor Brodie noted at the last committee meeting that he would like to have been contributed to the working groups, and he has been invited. So that is still been extended to him. Following the departure of the previous chief executive, admin support for the working group has been agreed, including the nomination of Ben Gard for legal support. This welcome administrative support will be utilised to arrange further meetings. So thank you for that, Councillor Jarman. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Is there any questions for anyone? That was an update of the, be an ongoing thing, probably coming back to this committee. No questions. Members' question time. Do we have any members' questions? We have no written questions. I've got no questions here. I wish to thank everyone for coming today, and I'm going to end the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael, for the last year. Thank you. It's your last meeting, isn't it? As chair, anyway.
As we finish the meeting, I can personally say, yes, it is my last meeting. I'm not